This week on the WriterCon podcast.
I love the old chestnut, stop aspiring, start writing. Because the only way to get good at your craft is to sit at your rear end in a chair and do it.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Runayn Gutteridge, best-selling author of over 30 novels and screenplays.
I am joined today, as usual, by our sound engineer, Jesse Ulrich, and filling in for Renee, the sensational author of Red Rain and 6 other books, and my wife, Lara Bernhardt. Lara, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, always.
We've made it to August now, and that means there's less than a month to go before our annual writers conference, WriterCon, which takes place in Oklahoma City over Labor Day weekend. Lara, I've already asked everybody else available, and we've all talked about WriterCon, so now I'm going to give you a chance. What's your favorite part of WriterCon?
Favorite part? I'm going to say the energy. The energy is always so good. Connecting with other writers, getting to learn about the craft, just sharing the vibe with other people who share all the same aspirations and dreams. There's just nothing like it. I always come away recharged and ready to go write like 5 more books.
I thought for sure you were going to single out the karaoke night as your favorite. No?
No.
I think that's only yours, Bill.
I think that's your favorite part, Bill.
You've got
yeah.
You sing way better than I do. Not that I've ever let that stop me.
Okay, but when you break out the piano and play with me, you have spoiled me. I want my personal accompanist with me.
You're like, oh, there hasn't been a piano here.
Yeah, funny how that happens. I just brought Jesse. You're going to be recording. We talked about this before. You're recording all the sessions, making audio recordings that are available to participants afterwards. You are geared up. I don't even want to think about what kind of equipment that requires.
Well, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I need to. I just need to double check with the AV people that I can plug in the way I would like to, and then I'm just gonna rent like 6 portable recorders for like a week, and then just get a lot of SD cards and run them all day, and then fix it. Break them up later.
Yeah, consult away, but I think you're our ace in the hole. You made that whole Billy Collins remote interview last year work.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was, for me, the highlight of the conference.
I still have a quart of yours, Jesse.
Oh yeah,
to get that back to you.
Yeah. Obviously, I've been in dire need of that cord for the past year. So.
That's the other problem with these events. People keep running off with your stuff, right?
It's true. They might not run off this stuff, then I'll have to pay the rental company back. I'll just like duct tape them to every device I plug them into. So
there you go. Well, our interview today is with Aimee K. Runyan, who is the author of a new historical novel just released called A Bakery in Paris from William Morrow. She's written many historical novels before this one, including most recently The School for German Brides, which came out last year, also from Morrow. She's been honored as a Historical Novel Society Editor's Choice Selection. She's a 3-time finalist for the Colorado Book Awards. And as you will learn in the interview, she is a passionate amateur baker, and that has a lot to do with her book. We will talk to Aimee after the news segment. Jesse, take us away. Well, I really like this first news story because it's like happy news and good stuff and not hand-wringing about Random House firing loads of people or diminishing book sales or whatever. But this involves our friends at Draft2Digital, which you've heard us mention many times before. They've sponsored this podcast and WriterCon. They are the single largest aggregator or distributor, if you will, of ebooks after Amazon, of course. But Draft2Digital is where you go so that you can get your ebooks distributed every place that isn't Amazon. I mean, they'll send it to Amazon too, but what about the other 30 to 40 other places and libraries and whatnot? Draft2Digital can help you out with that. And now they have acquired a company called selfpubbookcovers.com, SPBC. You can find their website. And for several years now, that company's been a marketplace for book covers where indie authors or small presses or whoever wants to use it can purchase. There's a selection of thousands of original, one-of-a-kind cover designs by many totally professional cover designers. And now that they're owned by Draft2Digital, that company's covers are available to Draft2Digital clients. Basically, what happens is that cover artists upload original pre-made cover designs with recommended font treatments for the name and the title and whatnot. The artists tag each image with keywords that will reflect the types of book categories, the genres, the themes, what kind of book this would be suitable for. And I suppose there's no guarantee, but it's very possible. In the first place, you can search through artist portfolios through all these covers by using keywords and categories, so you can find what could be the one-of-a-kind perfect cover image for your book, which looks great and totally professional and doesn't cost you anything. So it's free and less time-consuming. Lara, you've got some experience with covers. Think this might make life easier for small presses and self-publishers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As soon as I saw this announcement, I hopped over to take a look at the page. And let's be honest, not having a really nice, appropriate, and professional cover is just probably the one surefire way to take your book. And so having another tool right there with Draft2Digital, first of all, the fact that they have folded them into the company tells me that they think highly of them. So that's great. Right. I think anybody who is looking for a new cover is going to find this just to be super useful at keeping your bottom line during production low. Those initial upfront costs, keeping those low, going to help with the success of the book. Maybe that's some money you can put into marketing, getting more books out there, and it just seems like a win-win. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's a great, you may not find the cover you need. There's no guarantee, but then again, you might, because they've got a whole lot of really nice covers.
And knowing that those covers are going to be unique to yours, I have actually seen some covers come out that utilize the same artwork and on different books, and that you definitely don't want that. So something like this is way better.
Right. Once you've grabbed it, it's gone. Okay, news story number 2, which is also a much happier, more upbeat story than most of the author profiles we'd had. I'm not talking about the interview guests, but stories about, the various mystery writer murder moms, or the woman who co-wrote a book on grief with her kids before being arrested for murdering her husband. But this one is better. This comes from a New York Times feature piece about Lara Bernhardt. The headline of the article was, if I remember correctly, is something like, "From pet cemetery owner to identity thief to best-selling ghostwriter." And she's also an agent. Lara Bernhardt, she's got a new memoir coming out called The Many Lives of Mama Love, Love being her middle name. And it's a fascinating story. She took a cataclysmic nosedive, but before then, she owned a pet cemetery. Then she got hooked on heroin, which started a descent into crime. She stole a checkbook and credit cards and gift cards. She broke into people's homes to steal painkillers, and while there, pirated their Wi-Fi while gambling online and smoking heroin, using other people's social security numbers to apply for Amazon cards that she then used, at least in one instance, to buy books on parenting. Well, she's come around because she's now a literary agent and a ghostwriter who's collaborated on many best-selling books, including ones by, get this, Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama. Lara, I know you haven't had a chance to read the book yet, because as we record this, it's a few days from release, but what's the takeaway you see in this story?
This is incredible. I mean, the way that she managed to turn things around, I suspect it's just going to be an inspirational story to really remind us all. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we've done before. Even when we've hit rock bottom, you can always come back. You can always come back and be successful. Don't give up. Keep moving forward. I'm really excited to see this. I'm just a little bit incredulous, but isn't this what we tell our aspiring writers? Don't give up. Don't give up. You've got to keep after it. And how nice that this story has a happy ending.
Yeah. And that's what we tell people who develop these personal problems too. Quit, brush yourself off, get back to work, right? And
definitely,
that's what she's done so well. Jesse, you got to admit, this is a happier story than the murder moms. And
it's true. I mean, we don't know if she did or did not commit any murders, but she at least did turn herself around, and like almost the industriousness of some of her crimes, like you could sort of see the glimpse of the future productive person in there.
Yeah. Well,
like, stealing people's identities and their Wi-Fi in their own homes, like that's ballsy.
And apparently it became the shot caller at the jailhouse where she spent several months. So yeah, there was potential. She's had dinner with Oprah, for Pete's sake. So
yeah, take that, James Patterson.
I knew you'd get in the James Patterson jab at some point. Yeah. He's the one you want behind bars. I know.
That's right.
All right, Jesse, cue up the music. Let's talk to Aimee Runyan. Aimee, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, believe me. Okay, we have a traditional first question. If you could offer writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
Okay, I love the old chestnut. Stop aspiring, start writing. Because the only way to get good at your craft is to sit at your rear end in a chair and do it. I spent so long dreaming about what it would be like to be an author and to spend my days, making stories and weaving make-believe, all by myself, and getting paid to do it for a living. And I would be a lot further along in my career by now if I'd, stopped listening to the voice of reason and started writing a lot younger.
The voice of reason is never going to take you to a writing career, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. And that's fine. That's perfectly fine.
No, I think that's a great, I used to phrase that first question as if you could offer to aspiring writers or writers and I just thought, no, we're all writers. Forget it.
Yep. Stop aspiring, start writing. Yeah.
Right. Hey, congratulations on the publication of your new novel, which will have just been out a few days when this podcast is released. It's A Bakery in Paris, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's a dual narrative. Half of it is the story of Lisette, who is a privileged young lady living in Paris in the 1870s. And for those of you who are not well-versed in French history, that was a really tumultuous time. You had the siege of Paris from the Germans, the first of 3 times when, Germany invaded, France and got all the way to Paris, basically. And following the defeat, basically the emperor was displaced and the army was quelled for quite some time. And so the people of Paris organized their own government, known as the Paris Commune. And unfortunately, it was put down about 2 months. So the common people of Paris got to rule themselves for about 2 months, and it ended very badly. But it was, a fascinating and very interesting time in Parisian history. Mm-hmm. And the second timeline, we have our heroine Micheline, and it's in the days following World War II. So 1946, in the earliest days of the aftermath. And her father died in the early days of the war, and her mother's missing, and she's 19 years old and charged with raising her 2 younger sisters without much help. And so, a lot of her agency has been taken away, and she has to figure out a way to carve a life for herself and to provide for her sisters at a very young age.
And the connection between the two stories is the bakery, right?
Is the bakery, yes. They find their path in life through the same little green bakery in the heart of Montmartre, which is a small little region of Paris. It used to be basically a separate village from Paris. And it was, they are related. They are a great-grandmother, great-granddaughter. And so, it's not the whole, I would definitely want to avoid the trope of her finding some treasure of her grandmother's that leads great-grandmother's, that leads her to a deeper understanding of herself. But there is a hint of that in that they both find their path in life through this simple little green bakery.
Okay, so now I have one critical question that I can almost guarantee you were not expecting. So I have one daughter who loves Emily in Paris and another who loves the Great British Baking Show. So who's going to love this book more, Katie or Madeline?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually haven't seen Emily in Paris, but I am a massive fan of the Great British Bake Off. So, I think this might sit better with the baking show daughter. Just because I mean, it's it doesn't have the high fashion. I'm guessing Emily in Paris is a little bit to do with the fashion industry, and this is kind of the opposite of that. It's like Paris at its low moments. It's not the rise of Christian Dior and all that stuff, which is fabulous. But it really does have to do with the inner workings of a Parisian bakery. Which is kind of a special place. But I love like Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris as much as I love the Great British Bake Off. So I think it really will appeal because there's a lot of Paris in this book, a lot of Paris. So it could be something that they'll both love. Yeah. I hope.
That sounds fantastic. So
thank you.
Both of your novels feature kind of unsung women heroes, correct? Don't you think?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So what do you find most compelling about these characters?
They're women that, I think that because a lot of our history is told through the lens of Victorian historiography, which is the writing of history, and they make women out to be a little bit more passive than they are, or they write them out of history entirely. And so I just find it fascinating to find that, it was that women wielded a fair amount of influence. They might not have been, holding political office or, directly in charge, but they wielded a lot of influence, and it wasn't just parlor politics. And so delving into those different stories throughout the course of my career has been, fascinating. My tagline is celebrating history's unsung heroines. And that's, what I always hope to set out to do.
I love that. I can tell I'm going to love this book already.
Oh, thank you.
You mentioned that we have the two different timelines going in this book. Could you share with us why you decided to choose that format?
Well, the gentleman I was dating at the time, and this is early 2020, and I was looking for different book ideas after Across the Winding River, which was my 5th book. Yeah, that sounds about right. And I was dating a historian. And he said, Aimee, you really should consider writing about the Paris Commune since you're looking for ideas. And the Paris Commune, 1870s, one of the trickiest parts about selling historical fiction is that it needs to be a familiar enough time period that people are interested in it. And so I thought tying it in with the post-war would be something new and fresh because it's familiar enough that people are going to be interested in it. But it's not the whole, the French spy narrative in World War II has been done so much. I just did not want to jump back into that. But I liked that, we have one timeline where we're going directly through a conflict with the siege of Paris and the Paris Commune and the aftermath of the Commune, which was awful. And then the aftermath and Paris rebuilding itself. And we see that that's how their stories are parallel. And that these are periods where Paris was really redefining and restructuring itself. And after 1870, we had La Belle Époque, the beautiful period, with the 1880s, which is where Paris was the center of the universe. It really was. The cultural, artistic, musical world centered around Paris. And it was because of how well it rebuilt. And whereas I don't think Paris really recaptured that same sphere of influence after World War II, it did rebuild really successfully, but it was painful. And, me being a staunch pacifist, I liked showing the rebuilding and, the price that they paid for going to war in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. To be completely honest, I have just a little bit of historical war fiction fatigue. I agree with you that that's been done quite a bit.
Yeah, and I've done 3 World War I. I did 1 World War I book and 3 World War II books. But I tried to find, some elements of it that were different, like the Russian female fighter pilots.
Yes.
Hadn't been done. Kate Quinn and I were basically writing our Night Witches books at the same time. So it's pretty newish ground. In Girls on the Line, we have the female telephone operators, the Hello Girls from World War I, that really hadn't been done before that. It's been done a couple times since. And then, School for German Brides with the Nazi bride schools. And that was tricky because you're writing from inside the lion's den. And trying to make, human characters out of monsters. But you have to make them human or it's mustache twirling villains if you don't. So that was hard. That was very hard.
That sounds brilliant, though. You found some really unique ways to approach those stories. Those sound really good. Yeah. Thank you. But I think that's a key to success in the writing genre is finding stuff that's familiar because the reason why editors were buying World War II fiction and World War I to a slightly lesser degree, hand over fist, is because people were reading it. It's a huge audience. Yeah,
there's a big audience. I think people are burning out, and I think that we are looking for the next big thing. And who knows what that will be. But we're kind of, it's like any market. It's like the real estate market, what have you. It goes through ebbs and flows, and we're in a weird kind of transition period. And it's fine. You just weather the storm. The storm. But finding, finding elements of story that are just different enough to stand out in a crowded market, that's one of the keys of success. But it's hard to come up with something that's new and different. But that's why I thought including the post-war timeline with A Bakery in Paris would allow me to write about the Paris Commune, which was might have been a harder sell all by itself. So I really would have it would have been great to delve 100,000 words into the bakery to Lisette's story. But I think that Michelin's story really did help elevate it, so it worked out well. And the good news is that lovely historian that helped pitch that idea, I married him a year later. So, it's a happy end of the story. Yeah, and a great piece of advice to all historical fiction authors, having a live-in historian is aces, let me tell you. It's really helpful.
I would bet so. So, enough about war, because I think the next best thing should be baking. So let's talk.
Yes, baking books.
And that is something very unique about your book, right? I love to cook too. So, my favorite parts are going to be the recipes. I put recipes at the back of my Daniel Pike novels. The character also coincidentally likes to cook, although I think yours are, you're baking, right? And I think you're using the recipes as another way of connecting with the readers. Am I right about that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing was, I mentioned various recipes, various recipes throughout the book, obviously, because Michelin's in baking school and Lisette is starting up a bakery from scratch. Haha, all puns intended. And, I wanted to, because Michelin struggles with it more than Lisette. And her finding, she does find her grandmother's recipe, and she finds it as it's a little talisman of good luck, because her grandmother great grandmother had to start from the bottom up too, but she had the advantage of learning at their at the hip of her family chef, but I put the recipes in at the very end. I very carefully chose the recipes that had some meaning, and they were original carême recipes. So for those of you who read the book, don't try to follow the recipes as they are, because they are archaic recipes. Like they say, put it in a hot oven. Well, what the heck is a hot oven? By the way, that's about 450 degrees. But you can find more scientific modern recipes that are easier to follow. And I'll be doing a baking series on my social medias once or twice a week. Yeah, starting on launch day, I'll be sharing my chocolate cheesecake recipe, and I'll do a short reel introducing the recipe on my social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, maybe Twitter or X, whatever they're calling it nowadays.
Yes.
And then I'll be directing everybody. I'll post the ingredients, but then send everybody to my blog for the full directions, because doing a full produced baking video would require a production crew and a lot more time than I have. But I figure the little introductory reels and then sending everybody for printable instructions on my website is far more useful. And some of the recipes are direct from the book. Like the French sablaise will be one of the first ones. There's rose petal jam. It's a little bit of an homage to like water for chocolate, because it's a very romantic recipe toward the end of the book that she gives as an apology. And so I share a lot of those recipes, and some of them are very traditional, like the sablé, clafoutis, croissants, and that sort of thing. But then some of them are a little bit, my cheesecake, which is definitely not in the book, and the rose petal jam, which is definitely something unique. So, yeah, it's a fun project.
Yeah, sounds great.
How did you handle all the research for this book? You did your husband help a lot? Did he? I mean, I'm trying to take all of this in, and it just sounds like an enormous project.
Yeah, it was, and I did write a lot of this before the world opened back up again for international travel. I got to go to Paris last summer in 2022. And I got to see all the places from the book, including the bakery, because I lived on Google Maps and I found the perfect bakery to model it on in Montmartre, and it was green. And so I made my bakery green, but a darker shade, and because it was more of a pale green. And I went and I'd check the hours like 18 million times. And I go and the place is boarded up. It had permanently closed just a few weeks before I showed up.
Oh, no.
So I didn't get to go into the bakery and order and look around and tell the owner, like, I'm basing a book on your bakery.
Oh,
but sadly it was boarded up. I didn't see a for sale sign because it's probably just as well, because I do not need to own a bakery in Paris right now. But the top floor where everybody would have lived in both of the timelines is now an Airbnb, so you could actually stay there. I did not have the opportunity to do that, but I'd love to. So anyway, a lot of the research was done online. There's a couple, like a great secondary resource was Massacre by James Merriman. And I read that aloud to my husband on a road trip. And that's what we do. We do take crazy long road trips, and I read long historical books aloud to him, and that's how we have fun. And but I had to do, I did a lot of research. I think, honestly, I knew a lot about the World War II period, and because it was the period after, I didn't have to worry about specific timelines for things like battles and that sort of thing. So I had some leeway there. It really is a human story. But I researched online, like through the Red Cross, how people managed to go about searching for lost family members after the war and some of the legalities there. But there are great resources online for that. But that was, for German brides and for A Bakery in Paris, both of them were written in less than ideal conditions. I mean, A Bakery in Paris, or German brides rather, I was at home homeschooling my two kids as a newly single mom. Yeah, it was a lot. And I was writing it in 300-word stretches in the middle of the night.
That's really hard.
Yeah, it was. A Bakery in Paris, it was a little bit calmer period. Not to say everything was back to normal, but it was, it was a little bit less chaotic, so it felt great. But it was not ideal circumstances for getting to do a lot of on-the-ground research. Whereas for my next book, I got to spend a week in Paris doing archival research, and it felt like such a treat. So,
well, you were kind of starting to touch on this, but I'm curious. So, what does your writing day look like now? So, previously, it sounds like it was a writing night, and let me just say, I've been there, and so I completely understand writing in fits and bursts, and I understand how frustrating that can be. But is that very different for you now? Do you still have a set? So, do you have like a set writing schedule, or do you just write whenever you can?
Well, it's evolved. Both of my children, of course, we're in summer break now, and we're going to be going on book tour and traveling. So let's just, my normal writing period during the school year is really well defined because my children are both full-time in school, which is lovely.
Yep.
And
been there too.
So,
yep.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. You don't appreciate the school system so much until you don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, they're in school full time. They get on the bus at like 7:15 in the morning, something crazy. And so I basically curl up in my recliner and start writing immediately as soon as they get off to school. And I kind of have evolved to be, and sometimes I start writing before they get up because the peace and quiet of the house. I'll wake up at 5 and start writing and get in 1,000 words before the house is woken up. And, that 5 to 7 a.m. period is magic. It really is for me. And for other people, it might be, noon to 2 or to midnight to 2 a.m. And that was not my time, but I evolved to be able to do it during a lockdown. I'd sleep till 9 a.m. and then we'd start homeschooling. But it was just, because my son is a pretty early riser, there was no way I could have done morning writing when he was not in school. So yeah, I think the key is that it's evolved from the time I started. I wrote it. My first 2 books, I wrote them in the lobby of the local rec center because my son was in preschool and my daughter was not old enough to be in preschool. So I'd take her to the gym daycare for 2 hours. And instead of going to work out like I probably should have done, I sat in the lobby with my laptop and wrote for 2 hours of cheap childcare. And that's how I got my first, yeah.
I love that because that helps me. I feel better hearing someone else who just has evolved to learn to just write whenever you can fit that time in, and when you get big chunks, you just take advantage of it.
Exactly. So that really started, when my kids started, being in school full time. That was around Girls on the Line. We'll say the first 2 they were babies because I started writing my first book when my daughter was like 4 months old.
Oh wow.
So yeah. So.
And you have to adapt as they transition through different stages. You have to adapt and just work around that. Completely sounds familiar to me. So listening to you talk, I would guess that you are probably a planner, but how would you answer that? Are you a planner or are you a pantser? How do you prefer to write? Because somebody surprised me recently and at least purported to be a pantser when I would have guessed otherwise. What about you?
I am an aspiring, I like to think of it as explorers and mappers instead of plotter and pantser because,
nice. Okay.
Whether you're going to, do a road trip and just drive where the wind takes you, or you're going to have a map and a route. And I aspire to be more of a mapper. Let me tell you, I've had projects that kind of bit me on the rear when I didn't map things out well enough. And there is such joy in organic discovery. I don't want to have so much mapped out. I think it's really hard to map out, every little subplot and everything. Like in the School for German Brides, I had a character that came out of chapter 4. I had no idea that she was going to be like the most interesting character in the whole book.
Yes.
And she was not planned on at all. And so I like to leave room for organic discovery.
Sure.
But the more I get into this, the more of a game plan I like to have. I wrote recently my first contemporary book without enough of a game plan in mind. And I had some elements of it really firmly in my head. And I knew who the characters were, but I didn't have enough of the structure in my head partially because it was probably my first, foray into a full length contemporary work. And I thought it made the whole process much harder. So I actually start outlining more and more the further I get into this job.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I hear what you're saying. I start with an outline, but I definitely leave room for that discovery. And if something comes to me, I just will modify the outline and keep moving with it. So
yeah,
I don't
it's
think
like
you need
the
to
pirate
feel
code.
Constricted by it at all. But for
it's the pirate code. It's more like guidelines.
Yeah, exactly. And for the exact reasons that you mentioned, you'll be surprised by what you'll think of when you're actually working through it. But on the other hand, if you start without a clear idea of where you're headed, I think it just turns into more work. You can definitely get to the end result, but way more work is required of it.
Editing,
that's my opinion.
That's
what I've found to be true. So
yeah, it makes the editing, and because I believe in forward momentum, that's been kind of my MO from the beginning, is like you don't go back and revise. You don't go, you try not to stop to do
Sure.
extra research unless you feel like you're going to really write yourself in a corner if you don't get something right. You try to consider, like, for a great example from my first book, I started writing and one of the characters is a baker. And I loved writing that character, but I'm like, oh goodness, what were the licensing requirements for bakers in Quebec in the 1600s? Because it was a big deal. It was a very big deal. And so, I took 20 minutes out of my writing day, which was pretty precious back then, especially because I wrote during nap time. And I Googled it and did my research there because I didn't want to write something that I would have had to completely change,
Sure.
Change their career entirely if it simply wouldn't have been possible. And that becomes more and more true when you're dealing with more familiar periods in history, like World War I and World War II, where there are, legitimate armchair historians who know, practically have every battle memorized, and they'll know if you get details wrong.
Yes, they will, and gladly tell you about it.
Yep, and they do. So I think, I feel like forward momentum is really important. So I try not to stop unless I feel like it's going to create more work. But but that comes at a price. And like, I shifted a timeline in the School for German Brides, and I moved it a year earlier. And so I made references to a war that hadn't started yet, and I had to go back and clean all that up. And of course, I didn't catch all of them. So the copy editor, bless her heart, came through and cleaned a lot of that up.
Sounds just absolutely fascinating to me. This has been a really informative interview. One last question, Aimee.
Sure.
What's next? I hear you might have another book on the horizon.
Yes, so I have a book coming out February 13 of 2024 called The Memory of Lavender and Sage. And whereas A Bakery in Paris is my love letter to Paris, The Memory of Lavender and Sage is my love letter to Provence, which is where I lived in France when I was a student. And it's a story about a woman who's reconnecting with her family roots and trying to save a small village that her mother loved so much from, falling by the wayside like so many French villages are. And it's contemporary, and it was a lot of labor and a lot of love. And I'm really pleased with how it turned out. So you'll be hearing more about it on my social channels starting in September, after A Bakery in Paris has had the chance to get some spotlight. Right. And my next historical project, hopefully coming out later in 2024, though I don't have a publication date yet, is called Mademoiselle Eiffel. And it's a story of Claire Eiffel, the daughter of the famous architect Gustave Eiffel, who took over as her father's assistant at the age of 14 when her mother died, and basically became his helpmeet and lived with him at his insistence for the rest of his life, because he needed her as his right-hand woman. And she married his next in line. Adolphe Salle was his next in line to take over the company. And it's a family drama, and of course, a lot of it centers around the building of the Eiffel Tower, which is really his big swan song of a project.
And Aimee, my last book was set in Florence, which isn't that far from France. I think we should all probably be going on research trips together.
For sure, for sure, and that's been such a joy. Since the world opened back up a little, I've gotten to go to Europe twice. And it had been like 12 years since my previous trip. So, it's, something that I think there's nothing that compares to the power of a research trip for making fiction come to life. And I'm so fortunate, so thankful that I've had the chance to travel for my next few projects. It's just been incredible.
Well, this has been an incredible interview, Aimee, and thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Parting words, Lara.
Yes.
Is Red Rain still on sale?
Oh, you know what? It is on sale, but
I guess just much.
It's on sale you mean on sale? It's 99 cents, but I don't think it will be by the time the podcast is out.
Oh, I didn't mean sale that way.
Okay.
I'm trying to give you a chance to plug your book, Lara. Go for it.
Red Rain is available. Red Rain is an uplifting but poignant novel about persevering through the hard things that life throws at us. It's a story of empowering women and a story of friendship and coming through no matter what we have to face. And it is available everywhere and anywhere that you might like to buy books.
And it's a terrific novel, too. And while I've got you on the hook, Lara, I always do this in plug for WriterCon. So let's give the listeners a break from me. You tell them what's going to be happening at WriterCon.
WriterCon is an excellent conference it's designed to be of help to absolutely everyone at any level. We have craft sessions for people who maybe are just starting their writing journey. We have how to publish sessions for people who need that. We have marketing sessions for people who need to know how to get those important sales. And there are going to be so many people there that you can connect with and network with. And it's just so important as authors that we have those people that we can lean on and rely on and vent to and share ideas with. It's going to be so much fun.
Absolutely. And that's September 1 through 4. That's Labor Day weekend in Oklahoma City. So start making your plans now.
And ReaderCon. Don't forget ReaderCon too.
And the Readers Con.
Everybody can come.
Anybody who loves books. That's on Monday. If you want more information, visit the website. That's writercon.com. All right, everybody. Hang in there, keep writing. Until next time, remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.